You know, life has a way of forcing you to see the truth, even when it rips you apart. I never could have imagined that one night would change everything. My name is James Parker. I'm 36, just an ordinary guy from Ohio. Nothing extravagant, nothing out of the ordinary. My life had always felt steady, predictable. Married to Lauren for 7 years, I truly believed we had the kind of relationship others admired, solid, happy, and secure. But that illusion shattered the night I walked into what I thought was a surprise party. It all started harmlessly enough. Late Friday evening, I was lounging on the couch, half watching TV, when my phone buzzed with a message from Mark, a close friend of mine. "Hey man, don't forget, tomorrow, Lauren's got a big surprise planned. Be there at 8. Don't be late." I stared at my screen, confused. A surprise party? For me? Lauren hadn't mentioned a thing. It wasn't my birthday, and no anniversary came to mind. I even checked my phone's calendar just to be sure. Still, the idea that she had gone out of her way to plan something special gave me a flicker of warmth. Maybe this was her way of making up for how distant she'd been lately. Over the past few months, things had felt off. Lauren was staying late at work more often, her phone never stopped buzzing, and she had mastered the art of shielding the screen whenever I was near. When I'd asked about it, she brushed me off with a dismissive laugh. "You're being paranoid, James. It's just work." Then there was her wedding ring, or rather, the absence of it. About a month ago, I noticed she had stopped wearing it. At first, she made up some excuse about needing to get it repaired. But as weeks passed and the ring never returned, I started feeling an unease settle deep in my chest. I told myself I was overthinking it. I trusted her. But some part of me knew better. The next evening, as I drove to the party, that unease grew stronger. The streets were empty, my headlights slicing through the darkness. The hum of the engine was the only sound keeping me company. When I finally pulled up to the address Mark had sent, I found myself staring at an unfamiliar upscale house. The driveway was packed with cars, music thumping faintly from inside. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, that heavy feeling in my gut refusing to let up. Something wasn't right. Still, I shook it off. "It's just a party, James. Lauren went through the trouble of setting this up, and the least I could do was show up and act surprised." I grabbed the last-minute gift bag I had thrown together, an old joke between us, I never showed up empty-handed, and made my way to the door. The moment I stepped inside, the music hit me like a wall, a loud pop song blaring over the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, and conversation. Dim lighting cast warm glows over the room, where familiar faces mingled. A cheer erupted as soon as someone spotted me. "There he is! The man of the hour!" Confused but smiling, I gave a small wave and scanned the room for Lauren. And then I saw her. She stood across the room, frozen mid-laugh, her gaze locking onto mine the second I walked in. Her smile vanished, her face draining of color as if she had just seen a ghost. And then I saw him. A man stood next to her, his hand resting on her waist, his mouth dangerously close to her ear, like he had been whispering something just moments before. He followed her gaze to me, and his relaxed expression twisted into sheer panic. For a brief moment, the entire world seemed to stop. The noise, the laughter, the conversations, it all faded into a distant hum. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just stood there, staring at my wife and the stranger whose hand still lingered on her waist. The silence was suffocating. Lauren opened her mouth, maybe to explain, maybe to lie, but I spoke first. "Well, this is quite the surprise, isn't it?" The moment those words left my lips, the room fell deathly silent. The music cut off, conversations came to an abrupt halt, and all eyes turned toward me. The weight of their stares was suffocating. Confusion, discomfort, curiosity. The man's hand dropped from Lauren's waist like he had just touched fire. Lauren took a hesitant step forward, her face pale, her expression frozen in place. "James, what are you doing here?" Her voice wavered, cracking just slightly. And in that moment, I knew. I knew everything I needed to know. What am I doing here? At a party that was supposedly planned for me. The absurdity of it hit me like a gut punch, and I let out a humorless laugh. "That's a great question, Lauren." I shook my head, my voice cold. "I thought I was walking into a surprise party for me." I glanced around the room, taking in the familiar faces, some of our closest friends, some avoiding my gaze, others watching intently like they were tuned into a live reality show. "But it looks like," I continued, my tone steady, "the real surprise is on me." Lauren's lips parted, but no words came out. Her cheeks flushed, not from embarrassment, but something else. Shame? Guilt? Anger? I couldn't tell. The man beside her, Eric Jennings. Recognition clicked instantly. An old co-worker of hers. I had met him before, even shaken his hand at office parties. Eric, the guy who used to call me Buddy. The irony was almost laughable. Lauren stammered, stepping closer. "James, I can explain." I lifted a hand, stopping her in her tracks. "Explain? Really?" I gestured around the silent room. "Right here? In front of everyone." A ripple of whispers spread through the crowd, the weight of 100 eyes pressing down on us. I wasn't about to let her wriggle out of this. Not after months of late nights, cryptic texts, and missing wedding rings. Finally, Eric found his voice, though it came out thin and defensive. "James, man, it's not what it looks like." I let out a slow, bitter chuckle. "Not what it looks like," I echoed. "Really? That's the best you've got?" Eric shifted uncomfortably. Lauren's expression hardened, the shock in her eyes morphing into something else, defiance. "You're making a scene," she hissed under her breath. "Can we go somewhere private to talk?" I met her glare head-on. "Oh no, Lauren. Not this time. You don't get to hide this behind closed doors." Then I turned to Eric. The man who had shaken my hand smiled in my face. "And you," I said, my voice chillingly calm. "You're the guy who pretended to be my friend." Eric's face paled. The whole room held its breath. And just like that, the truth was out in the open. Last summer at the barbecue, Eric had the nerve to pat me on the back and tell me how lucky I was to have such an incredible wife. I wonder, Eric, was that before or after you started sleeping with her? His face drained of color instantly. Somewhere in the room, a woman let out a sharp gasp. "James, stop!" Lauren's voice cracked, laced with desperation. I refused to raise my voice. I wouldn't let her twist this into me being the one who lost control. My pulse pounded, but I kept my tone steady. "No, Lauren," I said, my eyes locked onto Eric. "I want to hear it. How long?" Eric didn't respond. He turned to Lauren, silently pleading for a lifeline, but she offered nothing. Her arms crossed tightly over her chest, and for a split second, I saw it, cold calculation flickering behind her eyes. She wasn't searching for an apology. She was searching for an escape. And then she played her move. "You're acting crazy," she snapped, her voice trembling, not with fear, but anger. "You're embarrassing yourself." Ah, there it was. The classic defense. Shift the blame. Make me look like the irrational one. I let out a humorless chuckle, tilting my head slightly. "Embarrassing myself?" My voice was quiet but carried enough weight to silence the murmurs around us. "Lauren, I walked into this. You set the stage. I'm just playing my part." The tension in the room thickened. People shifted uneasily, a few inching toward the door, eager to escape the fallout. Then my gaze found Mark, my so-called friend, standing off to the side, watching everything unfold. He knew. He had known about the party, about Lauren, and he had said nothing. Betrayal layered on top of betrayal. I turned back to Lauren, my voice softer now, but no less sharp. I hope it was worth it, Lauren. I really do. She opened her mouth, as if she wanted to say something, maybe an excuse, maybe an apology, but I didn't give her the chance. I turned and walked toward the door. The silence was deafening, the weight of every gaze pressing against my back. As I reached the exit, my hand lingered on the doorknob. I glanced back one last time. Lauren stood frozen, her shoulders tense. Eric hovered awkwardly beside her, looking like a man who had just realized he was in way over his head. I looked at the crowd, the stunned, wide-eyed onlookers who had gathered for a celebration and ended up witnessing a disaster. Enjoy the party, I said flatly. This one's for the books. And with that, I walked out. The cold night air hit me like a slap, sharp and grounding, forcing me back into reality. My breath curled into the air as I walked, no destination in mind, just moving. Anything to get away from that house, from her, from him. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. I already knew who it was, Lauren, sending frantic texts, scrambling for damage control. Or maybe it was one of our so-called friends, trying to smooth things over. None of it mattered. I needed space. I needed to breathe. How did it come to this? The signs had been there. I had seen them. I had just convinced myself I was being paranoid. The missing wedding ring. That was the first crack in the illusion. It's just uncomfortable, James, Lauren had said, flashing a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I take it off when I do yoga and forget to put it back on. I believed her. Because I wanted to. Lauren had always been good with words, always had explanations that sounded just reasonable enough to lull me back into complacency. Then came the late nights. The buzzing phone. The way she slowly pulled away, not enough to be obvious, just enough that I could feel it in my gut. And the gut never lies. I stopped walking, realizing I was standing beneath a flickering street lamp. The hum of the city surrounded me, cars rushing past, laughter spilling from a nearby bar, but I felt completely disconnected, like I was floating just outside reality. My mind kept replaying the moment I walked into that party, the music, the dim lighting, the way Lauren's entire body stiffened when she saw me, like I had shattered whatever fantasy she had been crafting. And Eric, that smug, pathetic excuse of a man. I clenched my fists, my jaw tightening. His weak attempts to defend himself, that cowardly. It's not what it looks like. Yeah, right. I couldn't go home. Not yet. The house that Lauren and I had built together felt tainted now, hollow and foreign. So I kept walking, letting my feet guide me, until I found myself in front of a small, dimly lit diner. A neon sign buzzed above the entrance, casting a dull red glow on the sidewalk. I pushed the door open. A bell jingled overhead. The scent of coffee and fried food wrapped around me, warm and familiar. Sit anywhere, a waitress called from behind the counter, barely glancing up as she poured coffee into a customer's cup. I slid into a booth in the farthest corner, away from the windows. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the menu, though I wasn't hungry. I needed a distraction. Something. Anything. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the image of Lauren, her arms wrapped around him. A voice pulled me from my thoughts. Can I get you something, Han? I looked up to see the waitress standing beside me, notepad in hand. She was older, with kind eyes, and a face that had probably seen its fair share of heartbreak. Just coffee, I muttered. Black. You got it, she said softly, as if she could sense the storm raging inside me. I leaned back against the booth, staring blankly at the table. My phone buzzed again. Sighing, I pulled it out. Lauren. James, please answer me. I can explain. James, it's not what you think. James, come home. Let's talk. I dropped the phone onto the table, my fingers tightening into a fist. Not what I think. If I heard that phrase one more time, I might actually lose it. The waitress returned, setting the steaming mug in front of me. She hesitated for just a moment before offering a knowing nod. Rough night? She asked gently. I let out a dry chuckle, wrapping my hands around the warmth of the mug. You could say that. She nodded, unfazed. Heartbreak has a way of making the world feel smaller, doesn't it? I blinked, caught off guard by her words. I hadn't said anything about Lauren or the party. Maybe she had just seen this kind of thing before. Or maybe, without realizing it, I was wearing my heartbreak for the whole world to see. The waitress gave me a knowing look, her voice gentle. You're not the first person to sit in that booth looking like their whole world just collapsed. I exhaled, the weight in my chest pressing heavier. Yeah, I muttered after a beat. I guess heartbreak has a way of making the world feel smaller. She patted my shoulder softly before heading back to the counter, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the bitter taste of my coffee. Lauren's messages kept flooding in, one after another. I could see the notifications lighting up my screen, but I couldn't bring myself to open them. Not yet. Not until I decided what came next. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I sat there for what felt like hours, staring blankly at the cold coffee in front of me while life outside carried on, oblivious to my world crumbling. Every now and then, I'd glance at my phone, watching Lauren's texts pile up like bricks in a wall I wasn't ready to break through. Finally, I swiped the screen, unlocking it. Lauren, I didn't mean for you to find out like that. Lauren, please, James. You don't know the whole story. Lauren, come home. I can explain everything. I scoffed under my breath. Explain? There was nothing she could say that would erase what I had seen with my own eyes. Lauren, the woman I trusted, standing there with Eric Jennings of all people. I shoved the phone into my pocket and leaned back in the booth, staring at the ceiling. My thoughts spun in an endless storm: anger, betrayal, confusion. But one question kept screaming louder than the rest. Why Eric? Why him? Eric Jennings had been my friend. Or at least, I thought he was. We worked together for years, grabbed beers after late shifts, swapped stories about work and life. I had even introduced him to Lauren when we first started dating. If there was anyone I would have trusted around her, it was him. Turns out, I'd been blind. The door to the diner swung open, a blast of cold air rushing in. Out of habit, I looked up and froze. Eric. His hair was a mess, his face pale, eyes darting around like he wasn't sure if he should be here. But the second he spotted me, he hesitated only for a moment before squaring his shoulders and walking toward my booth. I sat up straighter, my fists clenching under the table. Every nerve in my body told me to get up, to hit him, to demand answers, but I stayed put, my heart hammering as he slid into the seat across from me. James, he said quietly, his voice cautious. Can we talk? I stared at him, my expression cold. You've got some nerve showing up here. He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my eyes. I know. I screwed up. But there's more to this than you think. I cut him off, my voice sharp. Don't give me that. I saw you, Eric. I don't need your excuses. He exhaled heavily, finally meeting my gaze. I didn't come here to make excuses. I came because I owe you the truth. I narrowed my eyes, my jaw tightening. The truth? My voice was laced with bitterness. You mean the truth that you were sneaking around with my wife? Eric flinched like I had physically struck him. It's not like that, he mumbled. I leaned forward, my voice dangerously low. Then what is it like, Eric? You've got 5 minutes. Go ahead. Explain to me why the hell you were with her tonight. He hesitated, glancing around the diner like he was afraid someone might overhear. Finally, he leaned in, lowering his voice. I didn't plan for any of this to happen, he said. Lauren, she came to me. She was lost, James. She's been struggling for a while now, and she didn't know how to tell you. I scoffed. Struggling? With what? Eric sighed, shaking his head. With you, man. She said you've been distant, that you don't talk to her anymore, don't look at her the same way. She felt like you didn't care. His words slammed into me like a punch to the gut. I opened my mouth to argue, but nothing came out. Was it true? Had I really been that blind to Lauren's feelings? I shook my head, forcing the doubt away. That doesn't excuse what you two did. I'm not saying it does, Eric said quickly. I'm just, he exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I'm trying to explain why it happened. She needed someone to talk to, and I slammed my palm against the table, the sound making the coffee cup rattle. You were supposed to be my friend, Eric. His face crumpled, guilt etched into every feature. I know, he said quietly. And I'm sorry. I wish I could take it back. I stared at him for a long moment, anger boiling inside me like molten steel. Finally, I pushed back from the table and stood, glaring down at him. Save your apologies, I said coldly. You're dead to me, Eric. Both of you are. He didn't say a word as I turned and walked out of the diner, the bell above the door ringing sharply behind me. The cold night air felt sharper now, biting into my skin as I started walking again. Eric's words twisted and turned in my head, looping endlessly until I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Had I been distant? Had I pushed Lauren away without realizing it? Or was this just another lie? Another excuse to cover up what she had done? I didn't know anymore. All I knew was that I couldn't go home. Not yet. The freezing wind whipped against me as I wandered the dark streets, my mind replaying Eric's voice like a broken record. She felt like you didn't care. You've been distant. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't believe it. But a seed of doubt had been planted. Had Lauren really felt like I was pulling away? Sure, work had kept me busy. There were nights I came home exhausted, barely able to hold a conversation. But I thought that was normal. It wasn't like I had stopped loving her. My phone buzzed again in my pocket. I ignored it. I knew it was Lauren. And I couldn't bear to read her lies, or worse, hear her voice. Up ahead, a neon sign flickered in the darkness. A bar. I exhaled, my breath curling in the night air, and walked toward it. I needed a drink. And I needed to forget. The neon glow of the bar's sign flickered faintly in the misty air, casting a dim red hue onto the pavement. I didn't hesitate. I just stepped inside. The place was quiet, save for the low murmur of voices and the occasional clinking of glasses. It was exactly what I needed, a break from the chaos spinning in my head. I slid onto a stool at the bar and ordered a whiskey. The bartender, a middle-aged guy with weary eyes and a tired smile, set the glass down in front of me. Rough night? You could say that, I muttered before taking a sip, letting the burn settle deep in my chest. The stool beside me creaked as someone sat down. I didn't bother looking up until I heard the voice. Well, you look like hell. I turned sharply and found myself staring at Claire, Lauren's best friend. A constant presence in our lives since the day we got married. Her sharp eyes studied me, blonde hair falling over her shoulders as she took a sip of her drink. "What are you doing here, Claire?" My voice was flat, unwelcoming. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. She shrugged. "Same thing as you, I guess. Looking for a quiet place to think." I didn't reply. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she spoke again. "James, I know about tonight." I froze, my fingers tightening around my glass. "What do you mean?" "Lauren called me," she said softly. "She told me what happened at the party." I let out a bitter laugh. "Did she tell you she was caught with Eric Jennings? Or did she leave that part out?" Claire's expression didn't change. It was almost like she had expected my anger. "She told me everything. About Eric, about you showing up, about how it's not what you think." I turned, fixing her with a sharp glare. "Not what I think." The words practically hissed through my teeth. "I saw her with him, Claire. What do you call that?" She sighed and set her drink down. "James, I get it. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But there's something you don't know, something she hasn't told you." I clenched my jaw, frustration bubbling over. "Then maybe you should tell me. Because right now, I'm done with excuses." Claire hesitated, her fingers tapping against her glass. She was debating whether or not to say it, and that only made me more impatient. Finally, she leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lauren's been going through something, James. She's not okay." Her words hit harder than I expected. My brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Claire studied me for a moment, frustration and something else, pity, maybe, flashing across her face. "Lauren's been seeing Eric because she needed help. He's not just your coworker, James. He's her therapist." I blinked, trying to process what she had just said. "Her what?" "You heard me." Claire's voice was quiet, measured. "Lauren didn't know how to tell you. She's been struggling. She felt like she was losing herself, and she didn't want to burden you with it. Eric stepped in because she needed someone to talk to." I shook my head, my mind racing. No, no, that doesn't make sense. The man I saw tonight wasn't some professional therapist. He was holding her, whispering things in her ear." Claire exhaled slowly. "Because she panicked, James. She never meant for you to find out like that." I ran a hand through my hair, my thoughts spinning out of control. Was this true? Had I been so caught up in my own life that I hadn't seen what Lauren was going through? Had she really felt she had no choice but to keep it from me? Still, something didn't sit right. Then why was she with him tonight? Alone? At that party? Claire hesitated, her gaze faltering for the first time. "I don't know, James," she admitted. "But you need to talk to her. You need to hear it from her." I stared at the bar, my mind a mess. Part of me wanted to believe that Lauren hadn't done what I thought she had, that I had somehow misread everything. But that image of her wrapped in Eric's arms wouldn't leave my head. Finally, I pushed back from the stool, tossing some bills onto the counter. Claire watched me carefully. "Where are you going?" "To find out the truth," I said, my voice steady but cold. She gave me a small nod, a faint smile barely ghosting her lips. "Good. You owe it to yourself. And to her." I stepped back into the frigid night air, pulling my phone from my pocket. This time, I didn't ignore the messages. I found Lauren's number and hit call. It rang twice before she picked up. "James?" Her voice was shaky, fragile. "Where are you?" I kept my tone calm, firm. "Where do you think? Are you home?" "Yes," she whispered. "Please come back. We need to talk." "I'm on my way." I hung up and walked toward my car, my heartbeat hammering in my ears. The truth was waiting for me, whether I was ready for it or not. The driveway was eerily silent when I pulled up. Through the window, I could see Lauren's silhouette pacing in the living room. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I sat there, Claire's words looping in my head. She's not okay. Eric's her therapist. But that didn't match what I had seen. I needed answers. I stepped inside to find Lauren frozen mid-step, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen. "James," she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. I motioned toward the couch. "Sit down." She obeyed without hesitation, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint ticking of the clock. Finally, I spoke. "Start talking. What the hell was Eric doing with you tonight?" Lauren flinched, as if my words had physically struck her. "It's not what you think," she pleaded. "Please, you have to believe me." I folded my arms, my expression unmoved. "Then make me believe you." Her gaze dropped to the floor. "I started seeing Eric as my therapist months ago," she admitted. "I didn't know how to tell you, James. You were so distant. I felt like I couldn't reach you anymore." I clenched my jaw, fighting against the rising tide of anger and guilt inside me. "So why the party?" I demanded. "Why were you in his arms?" Lauren's face crumpled, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I wasn't in his arms the way you think," she choked out. "He invited me tonight to celebrate his engagement. I wasn't supposed to be there long. But when I saw you, I panicked. I didn't want you to find out like that." I froze. "Engagement?" My voice cracked with disbelief. Lauren nodded, wiping her tears away. "He's engaged to someone else, James. There's nothing going on between us." Her words hit like a sledgehammer, knocking the breath from my lungs. Slowly, I sank onto the couch, my anger unraveling into confusion. "Then why didn't you just tell me?" She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid you'd think I was weak, or that you wouldn't care." I stared at her. Had I really? Lauren looked up, her eyes pleading. "I didn't cheat, James. I swear to you. But I needed help. And I needed you." The truth sat heavy between us, and for the first time in months, I had no idea what to say. Her words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to clear. My mind raced through everything, the lingering hug, the secrecy, the way the party had gone deathly silent the moment I walked in. It didn't add up. I narrowed my eyes. "Eric's engaged?" I asked slowly. "Then why didn't you introduce me to him as your therapist? Why the secrecy?" She hesitated. "Because I was ashamed, James." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I didn't want you to know I was struggling. Seeing a therapist, it felt like admitting defeat." My frustration finally boiled over. "So your solution was to hide it? To sneak around instead?" I snapped. "You knew what it would look like, Lauren. Do you have any idea how insane this feels to me right now?" Lauren opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced down. Claire. Lauren went rigid the second she saw the name flash across the screen. "Why is Claire calling you?" Her voice was sharp with unease. I didn't answer. Instead, I picked up the phone and stepped outside. "Claire," I said the moment I answered. "What's going on?" Her voice was quiet, hesitant. "James, there's something I didn't tell you earlier." A sick feeling curled in my gut. "What is it?" Claire exhaled, and I could hear the regret in her voice. "Eric is engaged," she admitted. "That part's true. But James, I've seen the way he looks at Lauren. He's too close to her. It's not just professional. I don't know exactly what's going on, but something doesn't feel right. And I thought you should know. I stood on the porch, my hands trembling. Claire wasn't one to stir up drama. If she was saying this, she meant it. I'll call you back, I muttered and hung up. Stepping back inside, I found Lauren exactly where I'd left her, sitting stiffly on the couch. Tear-streaked face, guilt written all over her. But my resolve hardened. Claire says Eric is too close to you, I said, my voice sharp. That something's off. For just a fraction of a second, too quick for most to catch, her expression faltered. But I noticed. That's not true, she whispered. I took a step closer. You're lying, Lauren. My voice was ice. You might have spun a good story about therapy, I continued, my anger building. But something else is going on, and I'm going to find out what it is. Her face drained of color. James, please. But I wasn't listening anymore. Whatever trust one had left snapped. I grabbed my keys and turned toward the door. Where are you going? Lauren's voice shook, panic creeping into every syllable. To get the truth. And with that, I walked out. I drove aimlessly for a while, trying to calm the storm raging inside me. Lauren's words. Claire's warning. The flicker of doubt in Lauren's face when I confronted her. It didn't add up. And I wasn't going to sit back and let myself drown in her lies. I didn't even realize where I was heading until my car rolled to a stop. Eric's office building. A sleek, modern complex that fit him perfectly, polished, charming, and insufferably smug. I stepped inside, my anger sharpening my focus. At the reception desk, I put on a voice of authority, the kind people don't question. I'm here to see Eric. He's expecting me. The receptionist barely glanced up. People always believed someone who acted like they belonged. Minutes later, I was standing outside his office door, my fists clenched at my sides. I knocked. Come in, a voice called. I pushed the door open. Eric looked up from his desk, genuine surprise flashing in his eyes before he masked it. James, he said smoothly, what are you doing here? I didn't waste time. We need to talk. About Lauren. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing at his lips. Lauren told you about me, huh? That I'm her therapist? Yeah, I said, stepping closer. My voice was cold as steel. But I don't believe a damn word of it. So tell me, what's really going on between you two? For the first time, his smug demeanor wavered. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, looking away. For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his desk. Fine, he said quietly. You want the truth? The air in the room felt heavier. Lauren and I aren't just professional, he admitted. It started months ago. She came to me after you two had a fight, said she needed someone to talk to. Things escalated from there. My breath left my lungs. Escalated. I choked on the word, even though deep down, I already knew what he was saying. Eric didn't even flinch. Yes, he said. We've been seeing each other. The room tilted. The floor felt unsteady beneath me. The worst suspicion I had, the one I desperately tried to push away, was now undeniable truth. I swallowed hard, my voice hoarse. You're engaged, aren't you? To someone else. Eric shrugged, like it didn't matter. My fiancé doesn't need to know about Lauren, he said dismissively. These things happen, James. You're a smart guy. You should have seen this coming. Women like Lauren. His words hit me harder than any punch. Women like Lauren? I echoed, stunned at his arrogance. Eric smirked. That smirk. And I snapped. I grabbed him by the collar, yanking him out of his chair. Papers scattered as his chair slammed into the wall. You think this is a joke? I growled. You think running lives is a game? Eric's smugness vanished. James, calm down. I'm done being calm. I spat. You'll never see her again. And when I'm finished, your perfect reputation will be in the gutter. I shoved him backward into his desk and stormed out of the office, leaving him pale-faced and scrambling for words. I didn't even realize how long I'd been driving until I pulled up outside the house. My hands gripped the steering wheel, trembling, not from rage anymore, but exhaustion. I didn't want to go inside, but I had to. When I opened the front door, Lauren was sitting on the couch, her face pale and streaked with tears. She stood up the second she saw me. James, I talked to Eric. I interrupted, my voice flat. She froze, her eyes widening. You went to see him? Yeah, I said coldly. And he told me everything. Lauren's lips parted, like she was about to deny it. But then, she slumped back onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. I'm sorry, James, she whispered through her sobs. I didn't mean for it to happen. I exhaled shakily. You didn't mean for it to happen? My voice broke. You lied to me. You betrayed me. And for what? Tears spilled down her face. Please don't leave me, James. I'll do anything to fix this. I swallowed hard, forcing down the lump in my throat. Some things can't be fixed. And with that, I turned and walked out, leaving behind the life I thought I knew.